All right. Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody, and good morning and welcome to the Postgres Pulse. This is the first of a number of live sessions that we'll have where we look at what's currently happening in the world of Postgres users. So something that we've done is we've looked in detail at what are our customers asking us for, what's happening on Stack Overflow, what's happening on Stack Exchange. And we're creating this forum here so that we have an opportunity for live discussions with Postgres users and live reactions to the things that we're seeing, as I said, in our support operation on Stack Exchange and on Stack Overflow. Okay, so before we start here, a couple of guidelines to make this work. Please use the Q&A button to ask a question. So that's the simplest way for us to get the information. If you're not talking, please stay muted. The moderator will unmute you when we talk about your question so that you can add some color commentary and add more details. Please be civil and abide by the Postgres Code of Conduct. And then if there are other suggestions or topics for next week that you would like to have us address, either put them into the Q&A or send us email to postgrespulse@enterprisedb.com, and then we'll work that into future agendas. So today we have with us here Ed Boyajian, the CEO of EnterpriseDB. He's going to help us set the tone a little bit and give us a bit of background as to why we're doing this and what we're trying to achieve. And then we have Bruce Momjian and Vibhor Kumar, who are our resident Postgres experts. Bruce, known to, I assume, most of you, as having been the co-founder of the Postgres community and with the Postgres project for, I'd say, close to 25 years. And then Vibhor Kumar, he's the chief performance architect for EnterpriseDB, also been with Postgres for many, many years. Vibhor and Bruce and Josh Heyer, who is our developer advocate, are going to discuss a number of questions, some questions that we've picked up on Stack Exchange and Stack Overflow, other questions that hopefully we'll get during this session from the audience. But before I go there, let me introduce Ed, and Ed, give us a little bit of context here.
Great, thanks, Mark, and hi, everyone. Let me just start by saying that all of us at EDB hope that you, your families, and your loved ones are safe and healthy amidst this growing coronavirus pandemic and staying safe. I think as we all know, alongside this health issue that we're facing, we're also facing arguably the most significant and extraordinary economic and market turmoil that we've ever seen. And I think, you know, we've been like many of you, I imagine, questioning how do we endure a market that is where it is today and with an uncertain future. And I think, you know, maybe a secondary question, what can we do to thrive? Can we thrive in a market like this? And if so, how? I think, you know, in part of our mission to be the most customer-obsessed Postgres company in the world, we've been thinking carefully about how we can be helpful to you, our customers, and the broader Postgres market in the presence of such uncertainty and turmoil. And so one of the ways we've been thinking about that is to look carefully at what types of issues, what types of questions we're hearing from our customers and what we're hearing from the market in general, and try to be a source of help and insight wherever that's possible. Here's one thing that we've taken away just in our, you know, through our lens, that the market, at least for Postgres, continues to thrive and be strong. Obviously, some projects have slowed down, but maybe not surprisingly, the role, I think, of Postgres, and certainly the role of open source more generally, continues to look incredibly optimistic. And I think that isn't shocking when you think about the foundation of one of the challenges is the economic impact that this economy is having on all of your businesses. So we think that there's some value in trying to identify the prominent issues and concerns and questions that we see happening in the Postgres market, and playing back to the best of our ability, our insights, some of the answers to those questions, and places where we can be helpful more broadly. And so as part of that, we wanted to share some stats, some insight, and some data that we have with all of you, because that insight and that information really serve as a foundation for areas where we think maybe there's broader interest and broader need in the market. And so, Josh, if you could maybe put up the one graphic. As you guys may know,
Yeah.
Thank you. We have we have a pretty broad customer base that measures in the thousands, and because of that, we get the opportunity to see the types of problems that that cross section of users of Postgres is having. So this is only one lens into Postgres. We're going to actually talk about a lens into Postgres through the perspective of Stack Overflow, for example. But here's what we're seeing inside of our customer support organization. And we track this every day. And through the course of the beginning of the year till now, we have seen some patterns emerge which suggest to us the nature and type of issues that Postgres users are having more broadly. And so here's what we're seeing across our customer support cases. Interestingly, we are seeing, and maybe not surprisingly, a pretty sharp increase in the nature of questions around how to use Postgres. And it's by far the single largest area of inquiry that we're currently getting. In the second area are questions relating to errors in Postgres. The third are related to installation of Postgres. The fourth around configuration. And then the fifth around updates. And by looking at the data from this perspective, it puts us in a position to start to identify what the biggest questions are. And so that's really what we're trying to do with these sessions as we look ahead, is to try to put a lens onto the questions, and at least to our ability, bring experts to the table who can start to provide some of the answers to help the broader Postgres market. That's our interest, that's our ambition, and we hope it's helpful. We know it's a complicated time for most of you. We'd like to stay in the front of that as best we can in support of our customers, certainly, and of course the market beyond that. So with that in mind, Mark, I'll hand it back to you to maybe dig in a little bit to some of the details.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Ed. So this live event is accompanied by a blog that you can also see at enterprisedb.com/blogs, where we're discussing some of the things that we're seeing. One of the important elements is this is not just for EDB customers. This is really an opportunity for anybody who was currently working with Postgres and is missing out on the meetups, etc., to talk live to real Postgres experts. So I'd encourage all of you to put questions into the Q&A box, to send us email, because it's a pretty unique opportunity to have people like Vibor, Bruce, and Josh on a call to live ask very specific questions about Postgres. Okay. So what we did is we dug a little bit through the things that Ed just talked about, and we looked at, okay, what's happening on Stack Exchange and Stack Overflow. And one of the recurring questions that came back is a very, very generic one, which is really, I get a call, I'm a DBA, I get a call and I'm told, hey, the database is slow. The database is slow, what do I do? Okay, so, I mean, it's probably the most frequent question that a DBA gets. And so we thought that might be a good starting point for a discussion with Vibor and Bruce, to explore how do we go about that? How does a DBA react to that? And that's also outlined in the blog in a step-by-step approach as to how one can deal with situations like that. So I'm going to first hand it off to Vibor, who's been a long-term DBA working for not just Enterprise DB, but also other companies before, to help us walk through this a little bit as to, Vibor, if you get such a call, how would you react? What's the first thing you would do?
So yeah, this is a very interesting thing which always comes to the DBS life. People ask a lot of questions about slowness, right? And mainly the application developers, they complain about this issue. And generally the way we start is asking some intelligent questions. Questions around like what changed in the environment, what exactly is there new code got pushed down into the application side, is there any structure change happened in the database side, or somebody has written some bad queries. So we start asking all those questions from there. It's mainly about understanding what changed in the environment from the previous day. And then after that, looking into the system, mainly around understanding the load on the system, understanding the CPU and IO patterns, whether there is a high CPU utilization on the system, whether there is a high IO utilization on the system. It could be possible that network is slow. Because of that, you are seeing the slowness in your application side. We also start digging into the database logs. If there's a locking issue going on, we also try to see if the database statistics are up to date or not. Because if the database stats are not up to date, then the plan will be wrong and you'll be seeing a slowness of your queries. With that, we also try to see if query requires any indexes or not. We try to see if there's a change in the workload or if we need more memory, more CPU on the system. And based on that, if required, we need to tune it. We also try to see if there is any maintenance operation going on the system, like vacuum, auto vacuum, or somebody is doing a heavy data loading in the system. So overall, you actually ask some intelligent questions. And with that, you also try to define, of course, you would like to look into your baseline performance, because that's the key
So,
thing.
so you mentioned the term baseline, and I know in many webinars around tuning, et cetera, that appears again and again. So Bruce,
Mhm.
from your point of view, if a Postgres DBA, how do they deal with the need for this baseline?
Well, usually the first question is to really talk to the user and find out what is slow. So is it specific queries? Does it just feel slow? Is it a report that's taking much longer than it did before? Are people getting errors? Like, what exactly is it? And then once you find out what is slow or what the report is, then you kind of need to go into your corner and start to figure out why, right? And you can really approach it from two directions. You can approach it from the report and try and work in from the report of what is slow, kind of moving in, trying to reproduce it, trying to sort of see what facilities, what subsystems is that particular change impacting, and then starting to kind of dig through there. Or you can go from the other direction. If you have some type of tool that has been collecting statistics, collecting typical workloads, collecting typical IO loads or query patterns, then you actually have two directions you can come from. You can come from the report, or you can go from exactly what your baseline is, and a tool that gives you a statistics or an analysis over time. You can actually just look at the graph and say, oh, okay, so starting around 9 a.m. today, we have a very different IO pattern than we've had in the past week, or we have a very different query load that we've had in the past week. And then you have much more tools to kind of go at it. So usually the first time the person shows up, you've got to do the first method. You've got to take the what and move in to find out exactly what it is. But usually once you get a couple reports like that, you start to want to create some kind of baseline, some type of historic record of what your typical workload is. So that when somebody comes in, you can often just say, okay, I'm going to look at 5 things. And if these 5 things have not changed, then I'm really stumped, right? But you may find you look at those 5 things and it may be very clear right away. And that gives you much quicker ability to respond. Because a lot of times, as a DBA, it could be critical. Usually it's the end of the month or whatever, and you've got to really solve it pretty quickly. And having prepared the field, I would say, really shortens that time to respond.
So if I hear this correctly, then it's important that one has an established baseline that talks about, expected CPU usage, how much memory you're using, how much IO you have, how many concurrent connections you have, etc. So that when somebody comes and says, "Hey, it's slow," you can figure out, okay, what has changed, because that seems to be the key thing. Is that right?
But yeah, and you know you've succeeded when the person walks in the door and you can basically tell them exactly what they're going to tell you, right? They will walk in the door. My wife will
Yes.
walk in the door, right? And she'll say, "Hey, this is not," and I'm like, "I know. We did this change yesterday. I'm running this thing. It'll be done by 3 o'clock. You'll be fine." She said, they just walk out the door and they're like happy because you
Okay.
were right on top of it. So
So
that as a DBA is where you really want to be. It's having alerting so that when something unusual does happen, you find out about it first before people come in your door. So then you send out an email and you say, we are experiencing some problem. We are working on it. I mean, that's the DBA you want to have, is the person who anticipates these problems, doesn't wait for people to come and complain or hope that nobody realizes. I've seen that a million times. Nobody wants to give anyone bad news. But bad news is fine if you're being proactive, and
right.
people do appreciate that.
So Vibor, what kind of tools? I mean, yeah, the baseline and seeing and being alerted to changes in the baseline appears to be really important. What kind of tools would you recommend that users implement in order to be able to see that?
So yeah, tools actually, there are many open source tools available for PostgreSQL. There are some building blocks available in the PostgreSQL too, I would say. There are some logging parameters which people can enable to capture those data in the log files, but that doesn't really give you a complete picture and the view. So you would like to go with a tool which can give you overall performance, or I would say overall view of your whole system or environment. One example I can give you is a Postgres Enterprise Manager. It gives you the stats about your CPU, IO, how the system is performing. It gives you a trend around that. With that, it also gives you the information about the connections or any kind of a query which is running in the system. Similar to that, there is also one more tool called PG Badger. Suppose if you're logging a lot of data, information into the log file, PG Badger is a utility or tool which can actually parse that log file and gives you some trending graph or some analysis which you can look at and figure out exactly what's going on in your system. Again, you need to keep all the old log files and all the old report generated by the PG Badger. Some people use Prometheus Grafana, and with that, there's a Postgres plugin comes in to collect the data and show some trend and graph. I think Bruce made a very important point. If you have this whole monitoring system in place, right, before anybody can report you the slowness issue, you can look at the trend and the graph and can figure out by yourself exactly what's going on. And you can look at a specific point where you would like to focus on. So these are the important tools which people use in the field, and that's what I use.
It was actually a very interesting discussion, because you guys both talked about, what the method is to deal with the question. You didn't dive into connections, shared buffers, memory, anything like that. You really, I think the key message here is that the DBA needs to have a sufficient understanding for the system that's running so that they know where to look. And only then will they say, okay, yeah, I need to run tops, I need to run this, I need to run that. But very first, I need to understand what has changed so that I know what to focus on. That was very
Yeah,
interesting.
you really want to do that.
Yeah.
Check Postgres is another good alerting tool
Yeah.
that I recommend. I remember being at a customer once and they just pulled up top, and I'm looking at the top, they just throw it up. They weren't looking for any diagnosis. And I noticed the load average was really high. It was like 4 or 5. And I said, and they said, this is the system at idle. I said, why is your load average 4 or 5? I'm like, I don't know. So, I said, show me what your current queries are. No current queries running. I'm like, how can the load average be 4 or 5 with no query? Turns out they had a monitor. They had some kind of checking if the server's alive, and they were sending a single query like every 50 milliseconds. And it never showed up as an active query, right? Because
You're short.
it was too short, right? But it was they had botched some upgrade to a tool, and the tool had its timing wrong. And I don't know how long it'd been that way, but because they didn't have a full scope of what was going on, they never kind of picked up that this number didn't appear right. So you kind of have to have a spectrum of things that you're kind of looking at. And when one of those changes, and every time you have a problem, every time there's an error or something, you typically add another monitor, you add another thing to look at. And as you go within, your career as an DBA, eventually you kind of cover 98% of all the kind of weird things that can happen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Really good. Hey, I just got a signal here. Josh, you got a question. Was it from Stack Exchange?
I was actually asked on both Stack Exchange and DBA, Stack Overflow and DBA Stack Exchange. I'll post a link there into the chat. This is Zaruno, who's been reading up on the new materialized or not materialized keyword in Postgres 12, and wondering, why would I ever want to go with the unoptimized option? Why would I ever want to specify that it's materialized?
So it is a great question, and CTE is a relatively new feature, and there have been some significant changes in that. So let's maybe start with Bruce. Just give a context for what's CTE and what recently changed.
Sure, I have a CT talk on my website, so I'm quite familiar with the feature. We've had it for years and years. And one of the things that have always bugged people about CTEs is that the CTE was always evaluated before the main query. So, if you had a CTE and then a query underneath it attached to it, it would always evaluate the CTE first. And that was considered to be, we thought originally that the standard required that behavior. We also felt that people who wanted to sort of control the optimizer could use that capability. But later on, we realized A, the standard doesn't require it, and B, because we were always materializing the first query, the CT first, there was a lot of optimization cases that we were not doing. And it really was it was kind of this thing that just nagged me. It just bugged me over and over that this was happening. But finally, Andrew Girth, who's very popular, is Rhodium Toad on IRC, if you're familiar with that, did implement a patch which would automatically move the CT into the main query where we thought it made sense. So the reason you may not want to do that is if you had written your queries assuming that you wanted that optimization control, then you would use the word materialize, and that would prevent the CT query from being moved down in the main query. There's also a syntax called not materialized, which would effectively force the query down into the main query if it appears more than once. Because right now, even in Postgres 12, if the CT appears more than once in the lower queries, we will materialize it at the beginning and then take that result and use it in multiple places at the bottom. So both materialized is good if you wanted that optimizer control. Not materialized is good is if you are calling that CT several times below and you still want to push it down. Not materialized is very useful for that.
Okay.
So that's interesting. I effectively get complete control over how the final query is constructed.
Right. And in the old days, you basically always had it materialized. And it bugged me because people love the materialization, the CT syntax, not necessarily for optimization control, but because if you think of a query that's joining like 12 or 15 tables, and I've seen some really unreadable queries. I mean, it's just really hard to figure out what's going on. So people were using CTs more as a syntax simplicity than actually, something that was,
It's
and you
cleaner.
can imagine, it's very clear. You're like, okay, here's my department here, here's my office, and then I'm going to join them down here, and it becomes very clear. But again, the downside up until 12 is you were really effectively having an optimization penalty for doing that. And that's what bugged me. It was sort of this silent optimization penalty that I don't think a lot of people understood. And that's why I was so happy that we have finally got that fixed in 12.
This seems like a great example of where looking at what folks are actually using a feature for allows you to make better decisions on how to design that.
You're right, it does.
So Vibor, from your point of view, you're the performance expert here. This question, materialized or not, how does that, if I just think about performance, not about cleanliness of my query or modular code, how do I make the decision there?
So in the past, actually, people use the common table expression, which is CTE, mainly to analyze the volume of a data, huge volume of a data. So if you have a table which contains millions or billions of rows, and you want to work on a subset of the data, right? And if you're trying to join with the other table and other things in the same query, it becomes very slow. But let's say if you pick up the subset of data and materialize that, and on top of that, you actually do all your analysis, that actually gives you better performance. That's the way common table expression came in the picture. That's my opinion. And that's why people started building the common table expression on the subset of the subset of a data, of the high volume of a data, I would say. And in real world, people generally use for that purpose. So if you see, if somebody has a big table, let's say somebody has a stats data or IoT data, right? What people try to do, they try to write these common table expression to materialize the subset of a data first, and then start performing some operation or analysis on top of that. Yeah, that's the way I've seen people using this. That's a very, I would say, strong feature which we have in the Postgres.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. So we're pretty much at the end of our first event here. And if there were remaining questions, please put them into the Q&A box or send us email to postgrespulse@enterprisedb.com. We will meet again here at the same place, same virtual place, a week from today. We will continue our analysis of what happens on Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow, and in our support organization. And we're looking forward to having you join us here again, and bring interesting questions. And if you want specific topics addressed, don't be shy. We're always looking for input. So thank you very much, and see you next week.
Thank you.